Have you ever wondered what separates ordinary dreamers from world-changing achievers? What makes someone like Bill Gates, a college dropout, build one of the biggest empires in human history? This isn't just the story of a billionaire. It's the emotional, restless, real journey of a young man who dared to think differently when the world couldn't even imagine what software truly meant. In this story, we'll go behind the name Bill Gates. We'll discover how his sleepless nights, failures, betrayals, and relentless curiosity shaped the destiny of an entire digital world. From a curious boy in Seattle to the founder of Microsoft, from rejection letters to becoming the richest man on earth. This isn't just success. It's the secret of success itself. Stay with me till the end, because the secret you'll uncover might just change the way you look at your own life. Seattle, October 28, 1955. A crisp autumn morning welcomed a baby boy into a family that valued intellect, ambition, and discipline. His name, William Henry Gates III. But the world would one day call him simply Bill Gates. Bill was born to William H. Gates Sr., a successful lawyer, and Mary Maxwell Gates, a school teacher and businesswoman with a heart for community service. He grew up alongside his two sisters, Christy and Libby, in an upper-middle-class home where books were everywhere and curiosity was never a crime. From the very beginning, Bill wasn't like other kids. While most children played with toys, Bill was fascinated by puzzles, logic games, and challenges that stretched his mind. He could sit for hours, reading encyclopedias, absorbing facts no one else cared about. His mother often said, "Bill has the mind of a grown man trapped in a little boy's body." And maybe she was right. By the age of 13, Bill had already developed a strong interest in computers, a subject that was rare and mysterious in the 1960s. His school, Lakeside School, had one of the first computer terminals, and Bill fell in love. He'd sneak out of class, spending endless hours typing codes on that terminal, completely losing track of time. Sometimes he'd forget to eat or sleep. His teachers were puzzled. Some even thought he was obsessed. But to Bill, it was not obsession. It was discovery. That terminal was his window into the future. Then came Paul Allen, a slightly older student who shared the same passion. Together, they formed an unbreakable bond, built not on sports or parties, but on logic, vision, and a dream to make computers accessible to everyone. Their friendship was the seed of what would later become Microsoft, but at that time, it was just two young dreamers, fueled by caffeine, curiosity, and courage. At home, Mary Gates tried to balance Bill's intense focus with life lessons. She'd remind him, "Success means nothing if you forget to help others." That advice would one day define his philanthropic legacy. Bill's academic life was brilliant, yet turbulent. He was a top student, but often clashed with teachers because he questioned everything. He wasn't trying to be rebellious. He was trying to understand, he once said. "I don't think there's anything wrong with not knowing, as long as you're curious enough to find out." That curiosity would be his greatest gift, and sometimes his greatest curse. Years later, that same boy would drop out of Harvard University, a decision that shocked everyone. But that's a story for another time. For now, we see a boy standing at the edge of the unknown world, a boy with a glowing computer screen in front of him, and a dream burning so bright it could light up the future. What made a teenager abandon a path everyone called safe for something no one had even heard of? What did Bill Gates see that the world couldn't? That's the question we'll uncover. Stay tuned for The Leap of Faith. What would you do if the whole world told you to take the safe path, but your heart whispered, "Take the risk"? That was the question echoing inside the mind of a young college student named Bill Gates. In 1973, he had done everything right. He graduated from Lakeside with brilliance, earned a near-perfect SAT score, and walked through the grand gates of Harvard University. A dream for millions. But while others dreamed of becoming doctors, lawyers, or CEOs, Bill's dream was invisible, intangible, and, to most, insane. He didn't just want to use computers. He wanted to make them personal, a tool for every human being on the planet. And yet, in 1973, computers were giant machines that filled entire rooms. No one imagined they could sit on a desk, let alone in a home. But Bill Gates did. At Harvard, he was brilliant, but restless. He'd spend days reading complex programming manuals and nights lost in the computer lab. He rarely attended parties. Professors admired his intelligence, but worried about his focus. His roommate, Steve Ballmer, who would one day become Microsoft's CEO, often saw Bill pacing around, mumbling code ideas, drawing diagrams on napkins, and scribbling impossible algorithms on his dorm walls. One winter night, everything changed. Bill was flipping through a magazine called Popular Electronics when an article caught his eye. The Altair 8800, the world's first mini-computer kit for home use. His heart stopped. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. He ran across campus, burst into Paul Allen's dorm room, and shouted, "Paul, it's happening! The revolution we talked about, it's starting!" Paul, still half asleep, looked confused. "What are you talking about?" Bill held up the magazine and said, "The Altair. It's a computer anyone can own. We have to build software for it." The next few days were chaos. They skipped classes, coding day and night, barely eating, using borrowed computer time and stolen sleep. They wrote a program that would change the world, a version of BASIC that could run on the Altair. Then came the hardest part, showing it to the company that built Altair, MIT's, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But there was one problem. They didn't actually have an Altair to test it on. Still, Bill believed in their code. He told Paul, "It's going to work. I know it will." They took a flight to New Mexico, hearts pounding, and presented their demo to the MIT's engineers. When the program ran successfully, the room went silent. Then came applause. It worked. Against all odds, it worked. That one moment turned two college students into entrepreneurs. The MIT's executives asked, "Would you like to license your software?" Bill smiled and said, "No, we'll sell it to you." That was the birth of a new company. A company that would define the digital age. Microsoft, a blend of microcomputer and software. But before success came the biggest decision of his life. To build this company, Bill would have to drop out of Harvard, the world's most prestigious university. His parents were shocked. His friends thought he'd lost his mind. Even his professors begged him to reconsider. But Bill's heart was clear. He once said, "If you're born poor, it's not your fault. But if you die poor, it's your fault." He wasn't chasing money. He was chasing impact. Late one evening, he sat alone in his dorm room, staring at the glowing screen. He whispered to himself, "If I don't try this now, I'll regret it forever." That night, he wrote a letter to his parents explaining his decision. Mary Gates, his mother, didn't stop him. She just said softly, "If you believe it's your calling, then do it with all your heart." And so, in 1975, Bill Gates packed his bags, left Harvard behind, and boarded a plane with Paul Allen to Albuquerque. Two young men, a dream, and no safety net. They didn't know if they'd make money. They didn't know if people would even want software. But they believed. And sometimes, belief is the only code you need. They rented a tiny office. No luxury, no investors, just passion and potential. Bill wrote code all day, answered customer calls, and even handled the accounting. Paul managed the technical builds and networking. They lived off ramen noodles and raw energy. Months passed. Clients grew. The name Microsoft became a whisper in the tech world, small but promising. Bill was no longer a Harvard student. He was something bigger. He was the architect of a digital dream. He didn't know it yet, but that one leap of faith would change the way humanity lived, worked, and dreamed. They had the dream, the courage, and the code. But destiny wasn't done testing them. When success began to shine, betrayal, burnout, and brutal competition followed. Would Bill Gates survive the storm, or lose himself to his own creation? Stay tuned for The Storm of Success. Every dream has two sides, the light of victory and the shadow of sacrifice. In 1975, Bill Gates and Paul Allen had taken their leap of faith and built Microsoft from a small rented room in Albuquerque. The air smelled of burnt circuits, coffee, and endless ambition. Their goal was simple but revolutionary: to put a computer on every desk and software in every home. But dreams, when they start growing, bring storms. In the early days, Microsoft was nothing but sleepless nights and unfinished code. Bill, still in his early 20s, handled almost everything: coding, contracts, client calls, even fixing bugs at 3 a.m. He had no weekends, no vacations, no sense of time. Paul often said, "Bill doesn't work hard, he works impossible." The first big breakthrough came when IBM, the tech giant of the time, contacted Microsoft in 1980. They needed an operating system for their new line of personal computers. For Bill, it was the chance of a lifetime. But there was one catch. Microsoft didn't actually have an operating system. Instead of panicking, Bill saw an opportunity hidden inside a problem. He found another company that had built a simple OS called QDOS. Microsoft bought it, refined it, and presented it to IBM as MS-DOS. The deal changed everything. Overnight, Microsoft went from a small startup to a major player in the computer world. And Bill Gates, still just 25, became one of the youngest CEOs in history. But success doesn't come with peace. It comes with pressure. Bill's perfectionism became legendary and terrifying. He'd review every line of code written by his employees. He'd argue for hours over a single command. He slept in his office, skipped meals, and pushed everyone harder than they thought possible. Some employees adored his genius. Others feared his intensity. One engineer once said, "Working for Bill felt like running a marathon that never ends." But Bill wasn't driven by ego. He was driven by vision. He wanted to build software so powerful, so universal, that no one could imagine living without it. That obsession shaped Windows, the system that would define modern computing. In 1985, after years of testing, failures, and endless arguments, Windows 1.0 launched. It wasn't perfect. Critics called it slow and clunky. But Bill didn't care. He knew it was only the beginning. He told his team, "We're not building for today. We're building for the next century." Those words became Microsoft's soul. But behind the success, the emotional toll was heavy. Paul Allen was growing sick. He had been diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. The man who once shared Bill's dream was now battling for his life. Paul noticed something change in Bill too. The boy who once dreamed with joy now carried the burden of the entire tech world on his shoulders. Meetings turned tense. Arguments became frequent. One night, after a heated discussion, Paul said quietly, "Bill, I hope you never forget why we started this." Bill didn't answer. He just stared at the glowing screen in silence. He was becoming a legend, but at the cost of his peace. When Paul eventually left Microsoft, Bill was heartbroken. He never said it aloud, but losing his best friend was the price of becoming the man the world admired. Still, he kept moving forward. In the coming years, Windows took over the world. Businesses, schools, and homes all began running on Microsoft software. By the early 1990s, Bill Gates was not just successful, he was unstoppable. But the storm that had made him also started to consume him. His relationships strained. His health suffered. and the media began calling him ruthless, competitive, even the face of corporate greed. But they didn't see the truth. They didn't see the lonely nights, the guilt of losing friends, or the quiet voice inside him whispering, "Was it worth it?" Bill once said, "Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose." Those words came from a man who had won everything, except rest. And yet, even in the storm, his fire never went out. He was preparing for something even greater, a purpose beyond profit. What happens when a man who conquered technology begins to search for something deeper, something human? When money is no longer the goal, what becomes the mission? They say the greatest test of success is what you do after you've won. For Bill Gates, the man who conquered technology, the next chapter wasn't about wealth or fame. It was about finding the missing piece of himself. By the early 1990s, Bill Gates was living the dream billions only imagined. Microsoft had become a global empire. Its software ran on almost every computer in the world. Every keystroke, every startup sound, every spreadsheet opened, carried his legacy. But behind the headlines of the world's richest man was a quieter story. A man looking for meaning in a world he'd already changed. Bill's days were packed with meetings, code reviews, and strategic battles. He wore the same sweater and glasses, lived in spreadsheets, and saw life through logic. Yet, when the offices went silent and the monitors dimmed, he often sat alone, staring at the Seattle skyline, asking himself a question that wouldn't go away. Is this all there is? He had achieved everything he dreamed of. But something inside him was restless, incomplete. Then came a new chapter of his life, a chapter written not in code, but in companionship. In 1987, during a business dinner in New York, Bill met Melinda French, a bright, compassionate Microsoft employee who matched his intellect and softened his edges. Unlike others, she didn't see him as a billionaire or a boss. She saw him as a person. They talked about books, the future, and the responsibility that comes with success. Melinda once told him, "If you can change the world with software, imagine what you could do with your heart." Those words stayed with Bill like a song that refused to fade. Their relationship grew slowly, but deeply. Bill, the man of logic, found himself scheduling time to think about marriage on his calendar. He laughed about it later, saying, "I had to use my brain to follow my heart." In 1994, Bill and Melinda married in Hawaii. It wasn't a grand celebrity event, just family, close friends, and the quiet promise of a shared mission. Together, they began to see the world beyond boardrooms and servers. They traveled through Africa and India, where they saw poverty, disease, and suffering up close. Children with no access to clean water. Mothers walking miles for medicine. Entire communities trapped by circumstances they never chose. For Bill, these sights pierced deeper than any business failure ever had. He later said, "When you see inequality with your own eyes, you can't unsee it." That's when the storm inside him began to change direction, from ambition to compassion. He started reading everything he could about health, education, and poverty. He realized that the problems humanity faced couldn't be solved with code, but with care. And in 2000, Bill and Melinda founded the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a movement born not from business, but from empathy. The same precision that once built Microsoft was now being used to build a better world. Their focus was simple yet profound: to give every human being the chance to live a healthy, productive life. From eradicating polio to improving global education, they poured billions of dollars and endless effort into helping those who could never repay them. But it wasn't about repayment. It was about redemption. Bill often said, "I measure success by how many lives we improve, not how much we earn." Those words marked the rebirth of a man who once measured everything in numbers. Still, it wasn't easy. Balancing Microsoft and philanthropy tore him between two worlds. In 2008, he made another leap of faith. He stepped down from his full-time role at Microsoft to dedicate himself completely to the foundation. The man who once ruled the world of machines now chose to serve the world of people. Some called it retirement. Bill called it his second act. He spent days in rural clinics, talking to doctors and families. He learned the language of empathy and the mathematics of hope. Every project, every vaccine, every school built reminded him that true success isn't about power. It's about purpose. There's a moment few people know about. One evening, Bill visited a small school in Africa. A young girl, no older than 10, gave him a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for helping me dream again." Bill held that note for a long time. That night, he said quietly to Melinda, "I think I've finally found what I was looking for." He smiled, not the triumphant smile of victory, but the peaceful smile of meaning. Bill Gates had transformed from a dreamer into a doer, from a coder into a giver. But even as the world applauded, life had one more lesson waiting for him. A test not of his mind, but of his heart. Find out next. The challenge of change, when life tests your legacy. Every great story reaches a point where the hero must face the truth. Not about the world, but about himself. For Bill Gates, that moment came when success, fame, and fortune became both his power and his prison. The 2000s began with a golden glow around the name Bill Gates. He had become a global icon, a billionaire philanthropist, the man who gave technology a human face. But behind the applause, the winds of change were beginning to stir. As Microsoft grew, so did the world's expectations and criticisms. Governments accused the company of being too dominant, too controlling. In 1998, the U.S. Department of Justice launched a massive antitrust case against Microsoft, claiming it had become a monopoly. The man who once symbolized innovation was now painted as the face of corporate power. Headlines shifted from tech genius to tech tyrant. For the first time in his life, Bill was on the defensive. He spent months in courtrooms, facing lawyers, reporters, and critics. The world that once admired him was now questioning his ethics, his motives, and his empire. It was painful, not because of the fines or the lawsuits, but because his purpose was misunderstood. He wasn't building Microsoft to control the world. He was building it to connect the world. One night, after a long day in court, Bill returned home exhausted. He sat quietly beside Melinda, his face heavy with reflection. He whispered, "I wanted to create something beautiful, but maybe I built something people fear." Melinda held his hand and replied softly, "You can't control how the world sees you, Bill. You can only control what you do next." That moment changed everything. He realized that true legacy isn't about being liked. It's about being useful. So instead of defending the past, he decided to redefine his future. By the mid-2000s, Bill Gates began to distance himself from day-to-day corporate battles. He shifted his energy toward global challenges: poverty, health, education, and climate change. The Gates Foundation became a force unlike any other. Vaccines were distributed to millions. HIV research advanced. Students in underdeveloped countries gained access to schools and digital tools. Still, Bill's journey was far from peaceful. The same passion that made him unstoppable at Microsoft now drove him to push the limits of philanthropy. He demanded results, metrics, and accountability, even in charity. Some called it cold philanthropy. But Bill believed that saving lives deserved the same discipline as building software. And yet, life had more personal storms waiting. In 2021, after 27 years of marriage, Bill and Melinda Gates announced their divorce. The world was shocked. For decades, they had been the perfect symbol of unity. a team changing the world together. The news broke hearts, stirred controversy, and reignited criticism. People speculated endlessly about what went wrong. But behind the noise was a quieter truth. Two people who had grown in the same direction for decades were now learning to walk their own paths. Bill, ever composed, kept working. He once said in an interview, "We gave the world a partnership that changed millions of lives. That's something I'll always be grateful for." Even in heartbreak, there was grace. He continued to visit schools, meet scientists, and lead innovation projects. But for the first time, he began talking more openly about failure, regret, and humility. He admitted that power had blinded him at times, and that his obsession with work often made him forget what truly mattered. He told young entrepreneurs, "It's great to celebrate success, but it's more important to learn from failure." And people listened, because those words came not from the richest man in the world, but from a man who had lived every side of success. There's a powerful moment that defines this chapter of his life. During a speech at Harvard, the same university he once dropped out of, Bill said with a smile, "I was a bad influence. I told people to drop out. But I finally got my degree, honorary, not earned." The crowd laughed, but then his tone softened. What really matters is not your GPA or your resume. It's what problems you choose to solve. That line became the essence of his legacy, a reminder that success isn't about achievement alone, but about contribution. Today, Bill Gates continues to work on some of humanity's biggest challenges: clean energy, climate change, and global health innovation. He's no longer chasing the next software revolution. He's chasing the next human revolution. The boy who once coded alone in his room now collaborates with world leaders, scientists, and dreamers. His tools have changed. His mission hasn't. He still believes that curiosity and compassion can rewrite the future. And maybe that's the real secret of success. Not just reaching the top, but using the top to lift others higher. He had faced the storm, rebuilt his purpose, and redefined what success truly meant. But destiny wasn't finished yet. When the world faced its darkest moment, a global crisis that tested every nation, Bill Gates would once again step into the spotlight. Not as a billionaire, but as a believer. Stay tuned for When the World Stopped, Bill Gates and the Battle for Humanity. What if the next big threat isn't a war or a weapon, but a virus? The year was 2015. In a TED Talk that few people paid attention to back then, Bill Gates stood on a red stage and warned the world, "If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus. Not missiles, but microbes." The audience nodded politely. Then they went back to their lives. But 5 years later, the world would remember that talk, in fear. It was early 2020. Cities that never slept suddenly went silent. Airports were empty, classrooms were closed, and people stayed behind closed doors. A new word became part of human vocabulary: pandemic. COVID-19 changed everything. Businesses fell, borders closed, and humanity faced its greatest test in generations. And in the middle of the chaos, one name began to resurface: Bill Gates. Not because of a new product, but because of a prediction, one that suddenly felt like prophecy. People dug up his 2015 TED Talk. Millions watched it, stunned by how accurately he had described what was now happening. The same man who once built software to connect the world had now spent years warning it to prepare. For over a decade, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had been funding vaccine research, pandemic response programs, and public health infrastructure. He wasn't predicting tragedy. He was trying to prevent it. Yet again, the world misunderstood. Social media filled with conspiracies and accusations. Some claimed he had created the virus. Others said he wanted to control humanity. It was painful, Not because of the hate, but because of the irony. He had spent decades trying to save lives, and now people were accusing him of destroying them. Bill remained calm. He didn't retaliate or defend. Instead, he did what he always did best. He focused on solutions. While the world panicked, Bill's foundation quietly funded vaccine development for small companies that didn't have the resources to compete with pharmaceutical giants. He helped organize the COVAX initiative, which aimed to make vaccines accessible not just for the rich, but for every country, every person. During an interview, he said something powerful. "A pandemic doesn't care who you are, how rich you are, or where you live. It's a test of how united humanity can be." Those words carried the same spirit that drove him as a young man, the belief that technology and compassion could make the world fairer. He wasn't in boardrooms anymore. He was in Zoom calls with scientists, researchers, and world leaders. He didn't wear a CEO badge. He wore the patience of a teacher, the calm of a doctor, and the heart of a human being who cared. But behind that calm, he struggled. He watched as misinformation spread faster than the virus. He saw people reject science, reject reason, and it broke his heart. One night, he looked out the window of his quiet Seattle home. The city lights were dim. The streets were empty. He thought of the first line of code he ever wrote, and how far that journey had taken him. Maybe success isn't about what you build, he whispered to himself, but about what you protect. Months passed. Vaccines rolled out. Lives were saved. Slowly, the world began to breathe again. And when history would look back, it would see that while nations argued, while leaders fought for credit, Bill Gates kept working behind the scenes, funding, coordinating, connecting, just like he had always done. His prediction had not been a curse. It was a warning and a gift. He wasn't a prophet. He was a planner, and his plan had always been simple: to use intelligence for the service of humanity. As life began to return to normal, Bill faced yet another shift, this time within himself. The pandemic had changed him. He had seen how fragile the world really was, how easily fear could replace logic. He had also seen the beauty of people helping one another, doctors risking their lives, scientists working day and night, volunteers delivering food to strangers. He realized something profound: that success is not about being ahead of others. It's about helping others move forward with you. And so, he decided to devote the rest of his life not to business, but to resilience, to ensuring that the next generation would be ready for whatever challenges awaited them. In his post-pandemic speeches, his tone was no longer that of a billionaire giving advice. It was that of a father, a teacher, a man who had seen the cost of unpreparedness. He once said, "The next crisis may not be a virus. It could be climate change or inequality. But whatever it is, we can face it, if we face it together." Bill's legacy was no longer just Microsoft. It was hope. It was foresight. It was proof that intelligence means nothing without empathy. The boy who dropped out of Harvard had taught the world a lesson that no university could: that the real secret of success is to keep learning, not just with your mind, but with your heart. He had warned the world, guided it through chaos, and reminded humanity what unity truly means. But even as the world began to recover, Bill's story wasn't over. A new mission was calling, one that would challenge not just his mind, but his legacy. Stay tuned for Scene 7, The Green Vision, Bill Gates and the Future of Our Planet. "We have one home, and it's on fire." The voice was calm, steady, but the message carried urgency. It was Bill Gates, standing on a stage, not talking about computers or viruses this time, but about the climate crisis threatening the very planet that made his success possible. After decades of transforming technology and philanthropy, Bill had turned his mind toward a new battlefield: climate change. He had seen enough of the world to understand one truth. If we don't protect Earth, everything else, business, innovation, progress, will lose meaning. In 2021, he released his book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. But this wasn't just another billionaire lecture. It was a blueprint, a roadmap for how humanity could still win the race against time. His tone wasn't that of an expert, but of a concerned citizen. "I may not be a scientist," he said, "but I know how to solve problems. And this one is the biggest problem we've ever faced." Bill's new mission wasn't about profit. It was about survival. He began investing billions into renewable energy innovations: clean hydrogen, carbon capture, sustainable cement, and advanced nuclear power. He created an initiative called Breakthrough Energy, a coalition of inventors, scientists, and entrepreneurs all working together to make green technologies affordable and scalable. Unlike the digital revolution, this one couldn't be coded in a garage. It needed governments, industries, and people, all united. He spent hours every day reading climate reports, meeting with experts, and studying environmental data. He wasn't chasing headlines anymore. He was chasing hope. But with every great mission comes criticism. People questioned his motives again. Some said billionaires shouldn't decide the planet's future. Others doubted whether one man could make a difference. Bill listened, then responded, not with words, but with action. He funded projects that turned waste into clean energy. He helped small startups develop technology that could remove carbon from the air. He even supported farmers trying to grow food sustainably in drought-hit regions. He wasn't waiting for the perfect solution. He was creating the path as he walked. One of the most emotional moments came during a visit to Kenya. Bill met a group of young engineers working on solar-powered irrigation pumps. They showed him how their invention was helping small farmers grow crops even during dry seasons. Bill's eyes softened. He saw the same spark in those young people that he had once seen in himself at 19. The belief that technology, when guided by purpose, could heal the world. He said to them, "This is what success looks like. Not a company worth billions, but an idea that feeds people." The engineers smiled, unaware that their small invention had reignited one of the richest minds on Earth. At home, Bill began simplifying his life. He spent more time in his study, surrounded by books, models of wind turbines, and climate charts. His children were grown now, his marriage behind him, and the world quieter. But his purpose burned brighter than ever. He once told a friend, "I've built software for machines. Now I want to build solutions for life." Every morning, he would wake up before sunrise, look out his window at the fog-covered Seattle skyline, and write notes about future energy ideas. Sometimes they were grand, like artificial photosynthesis. Other times, they were simple, like planting more trees in cities. It wasn't about scale anymore. It was about sincerity. The world began to notice. From government summits to university classrooms, people quoted Bill Gates's climate ideas. He had gone from being a software tycoon to a global teacher of responsibility. But more importantly, he was inspiring a generation to think differently. Students, engineers, and young entrepreneurs around the world began asking a new kind of question. How can I use my success to protect what matters? And that, Bill believed, was the most important question of all. In 2023, he delivered a speech that summarized his journey in one breathtaking line. "I spent the first half of my life building the future. I'll spend the rest of it ensuring that future still exists." The audience gave him a standing ovation, not just for his intelligence, but for his humanity. Because this was no longer the story of a billionaire or a programmer. It was the story of a man who refused to stop caring. Bill Gates's fight against climate change continues today. Through his foundation, his research investments, and his relentless advocacy for sustainable innovation. He may no longer run Microsoft, but in a way, he's writing a different kind of code. One that programs hope, compassion, and endurance into the heart of humanity. He once said, "The secret of success is simple. Never stop learning, and never stop giving." And as the world faces its next challenges, his journey reminds us that success isn't measured by what you own, but by what you leave behind. He had conquered business, transformed philanthropy, and turned his genius toward saving the earth. But as the final chapter of his story unfolds, Bill Gates will reveal the true essence of his success. Not wealth, not fame, but wisdom. Stay tuned for Legacy of Light, the lessons Bill Gates left for the world. We come into this world with nothing, and we leave with lessons. Those were the quiet words of Bill Gates, spoken during an interview in his mid-60s. His hair had turned gray, his face carried lines of time, but his eyes, they still held the spark of curiosity that once lit up a small dorm room in Harvard decades ago. Bill Gates was no longer chasing the future. He was shaping its meaning. After decades of creation, revolution, and reflection, he had become a teacher to millions. Not in classrooms, but through example. He often said, "If your goal is just to be rich, you'll never feel rich enough. But if your goal is to be useful, you'll always be fulfilled." And that, perhaps, was the most important secret of success he ever revealed. In his later years, Bill's routine slowed, but his mind never stopped. He spent his mornings reading, everything from philosophy to global economics. He journaled about his mistakes, his regrets, his hopes for humanity. And every page began with a simple question. What can I still learn today? He visited schools more often than boardrooms, spoke with young innovators more than CEOs. He no longer sought applause. He sought understanding. In one university speech, a student asked, "Mr. Gates, what's the biggest thing you've learned after all this success?" He paused, smiled gently, and said, "That success is not about getting ahead of others. It's about helping others get ahead of you." The crowd went silent. It was the kind of truth that needed no further explanation. At his foundation, Bill continued working quietly, funding projects that many had forgotten. Clean water programs, affordable health care, women's education, and digital access for the poor. He believed that every human mind deserves a chance to shine. He once told a group of volunteers in Africa, "The next Bill Gates might be here, and the only thing standing between them and their dream is opportunity." That belief became his mission, to build bridges of opportunity, where the world had built walls of inequality. Behind the scenes, Bill had also begun reflecting more deeply on his own journey, his mistakes, his ego, his obsessions. He admitted that his early years at Microsoft had made him impatient, sometimes harsh, too focused on perfection. He laughed about it now, saying, "I wanted to change the world, but sometimes I forgot to listen to it." That humility, the rare kind that comes after decades of triumph, became his quiet strength. He no longer saw himself as the smartest man in the room. He saw himself as a student of life, still learning from every conversation, every failure, every sunrise. In 2025, during an emotional event celebrating his lifetime achievements, a journalist asked, "Mr. Gates, after all this, Microsoft, the foundation, your global work, what do you consider your greatest success?" Bill paused. The audience leaned forward, expecting a grand statement. He smiled softly and said, "That I never stopped being curious. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't power. It was curiosity. The invisible fire that had driven him from a young boy with a dream to a man who changed the world." He continued, "Curiosity gives you the courage to dream. Compassion gives you the courage to serve. Together, They build a meaningful life. The audience stood and applauded, not for his achievements, but for his truth. Later that evening, Bill returned home to his quiet Seattle residence, the same home where his children once played, where Melinda and he had once planned their vision for the world. He sat near the window, a soft rain falling outside, and looked at the reflection of city lights on the water. He whispered to himself, maybe success was never about the destination. Maybe it was always about the journey, and the people you help along the way. In that silence, surrounded by memories of code, books, and kindness, Bill Gates smiled. Not the smile of a billionaire, but the smile of a man at peace. He continues to work, still writing, still funding, still speaking. But more than anything, he continues to inspire. From entrepreneurs to students, from scientists to dreamers, his story now serves as proof that success has layers. The first is achievement, what you build. The second is impact, what you change. And the final is legacy, what you leave behind. Bill Gates has mastered all three, but it's the last one that defines him most. As he once said, the secret of success is that there is no secret. It's hard work, humility, and the willingness to keep learning, even when the world stops listening. The boy who dreamed of a digital world ended up teaching humanity the code for a meaningful life. But his journey isn't truly over, because every curious mind, every young dreamer, every kind heart he inspired is now part of his legacy. When one life learns to shine, it lights 1,000 others. That's how change begins. Not with noise, not with fame, but with one person's example. And for millions across the world, that light came from Bill Gates. Not just the billionaire, but the believer. In classrooms across India, Kenya, Brazil, and Canada, students study not only Microsoft's inventions, but the mindset that created them. They watch his speeches, read his quotes, and repeat the same simple lesson he left behind. Your success means nothing unless it helps someone else succeed. His story, once about computers and code, had evolved into a blueprint for purposeful living. From startup founders in Silicon Valley to young dreamers in small towns, Bill Gates became a symbol of something bigger than technology. He became a symbol of possibility. In a small town in Pakistan, a 17-year-old girl named Aisha watches a documentary about Bill Gates. She listens as he talks about curiosity, learning, and service. Later that night, she opens her old laptop and begins coding a health app for rural mothers. When asked what inspired her, she smiles and says, "He made me believe that knowledge can heal." Thousands of miles away, in Nigeria, a young engineer named Emmanuel reads How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. He gathers friends and starts a project using recycled plastic to build low-cost homes. He says, "If Bill Gates can care about the world at his level, then I can care at mine." In universities around the world, professors use his story to teach ethics in innovation. Not how to become rich, but how to become relevant. They show how Gates balanced brilliance with compassion, and how true intelligence is not about outsmarting others, but about outserving them. Students study his failures, too, the missteps, the lawsuits, the criticism, because those parts of his story teach the most powerful lesson of all, that even the strongest fall, but the greatest rise with humility. One student once said after a lecture, "Bill Gates taught me that it's okay to fail, as long as you fail forward." But the ripple didn't stop at classrooms. It reached entrepreneurs, scientists, artists, and leaders. Elon Musk once mentioned that Gates's early work inspired his obsession with technology. Satya Nadella, the current CEO of Microsoft, calls Bill his lifelong mentor. Even world leaders quote his thoughts on global cooperation and compassion. Everywhere his ideas go, they leave behind a message: that intellect without empathy is empty. In a quiet village in Africa, a mother holds her vaccinated child, a vaccine funded by the Gates Foundation. She doesn't know who Bill Gates is. She doesn't care about billionaires or brands. All she knows is that her baby lived, and that, in itself, is legacy. Not a logo, not a company, but a life saved. Bill's influence has also reshaped how people see wealth. For decades, he's encouraged billionaires to join the Giving Pledge, committing most of their fortunes to humanity. More than 200 of the world's richest have followed in his footsteps. He proved that money isn't the measure of greatness. What you do with it is, and that philosophy has spread like wildfire. Young entrepreneurs now dream not only of becoming successful, but of becoming significant. They're creating apps for clean water, starting AI-driven education tools, and building solar-powered towns. All of them echo the same belief that Bill planted in the world. We rise by lifting others. Even in the digital world, YouTube channels, podcasts, online communities, his journey continues to inspire millions. People dissect his habits: reading, reflection, goal-setting, lifelong learning. They copy not his wealth, but his discipline. Not his fame, but his focus. Because somewhere deep down, they know that the real secret of success is not luck, not genius, but consistency, fueled by purpose. In one emotional documentary, a young man says through tears, "Bill Gates never met me, but he changed my life. Because of him, I believe I can build something that matters." That's the ripple. Unseen, unstoppable, eternal. In 2025, at a global education conference, Bill was invited to speak again. The hall was filled with young faces, dreamers from every corner of the world. He looked at them, paused, and said, "I've written millions of lines of code, but the most important program I ever wrote was not in a computer. It was in my heart, and it said, 'Never stop helping others learn.'" The crowd erupted in applause, but Bill just smiled, because the applause wasn't for him. It was for every young person who had chosen to build a better world. As he walked off stage, the lights dimmed and a video played. A montage of children, engineers, teachers, and dreamers across the world, all inspired by his journey. From Seattle to South Africa, from Tokyo to Toronto, the ripple had become a wave. And somewhere, behind the curtain, Bill Gates closed his eyes and whispered, "The best legacy is not what people remember you for, but what they continue because of you." The ripple has become a revolution, and it's still expanding. But there's one final truth left to tell. The secret that Bill Gates himself revealed. Not in words, but in the way he lived. Stay tuned for The Final Code, the true secret of success. What if the greatest code ever written wasn't made of numbers, but of kindness? What if success, the kind we all chase, isn't about reaching the top, but about lifting others as we climb? For Bill Gates, that realization didn't come in a boardroom. It came in silence, long after the applause had faded, when he began to look not at what he built, but at what he became. It was a quiet evening in his Seattle home. The lights of the city shimmered across Lake Washington. Bill sat alone in his study, the same desk where he had once sketched the first ideas for Microsoft. The shelves were lined with books, awards, and memories of a life that had changed the world. But on the table before him lay something different. A handwritten note. It wasn't a business plan. It wasn't a foundation proposal. It was a single question he had written to himself. Have I done enough? He stared at it for a long time. Bill Gates, the man who created one of the world's most powerful companies, who gave away billions, who fought disease and ignorance, still wondered if it was enough. And that's when it hit him. The secret of success wasn't about how much you do. It was about how deeply you care. He remembered his parents, his mother's gentle insistence to use your privilege to help others. He remembered Paul Allen, his friend and co-founder, whose early death reminded him that time is life's most precious code. He remembered the mistakes, the criticism, the sleepless nights, and the courage it took to admit he was wrong. Every success story, he realized, is not built on victories, but on how many times you choose to grow after failure. In one of his interviews, he said something quietly profound. "I measure success by the number of people whose lives I've made better." That single sentence became his final definition of greatness. Not stock prices, not fame, not trophies, but impact. In his later years, Bill Gates began spending more time mentoring young minds. He hosted reading sessions, innovation camps, and roundtable talks. He didn't talk much about money. He talked about mindset. He told them, "Don't chase success. Chase excellence. Success will follow you naturally." And then he would smile that familiar, humble smile. The one that said he had seen everything, yet was still learning. In one moving moment, during a university lecture, a student asked, "Mr. Gates, what's the one thing you wish you had known earlier in life?" He paused, thought deeply, and said, "That empathy is a superpower." The crowd went silent, because in that moment, the billionaire tech icon wasn't a symbol of wealth. He was a symbol of wisdom. He explained how every major decision he made, from Microsoft to the Gates Foundation, only made sense when guided by empathy, when he thought about people, not profits. And that, he said, was the final code, the one line that connects every human being. If you can understand someone else's pain, you'll never create something useless. Years later, when asked what he would want his legacy to be, he said softly, "That I cared. That's it, that I truly cared. Because in the end, success is not what you leave behind. It's what you set in motion." Bill still spends hours reading, learning, dreaming. Even after changing the world, he still believes the best ideas are yet to come. Not from him, but from you, from us, from the next generation. He once told a young entrepreneur, "Don't look for the next Microsoft. Look for the next mission worth your life." And those words continue to echo through innovation hubs, classrooms, and hearts across the world. Imagine this scene. Bill Gates standing before a small group of children in a rural school. Laptops donated by his foundation glowing softly in front of them. He bends down to help one child fix a coding error. The boy looks up and smiles. Bill laughs, saying, "Looks like you'll be teaching me next time." That's the circle of success, when the teacher becomes the student, and the legacy lives on. The true secret of success, he once said, isn't found in algorithms or ambition. It's found in humility, patience, and purpose. And maybe that's the message we all need to remember. Because in a world obsessed with speed, he teaches us to pause. In a world chasing fame, he reminds us to serve. And in a world full of noise, he shows us that the quietest minds often make the loudest difference. Bill Gates' story ends where it began, with a dream, a computer, and a relentless belief that one person can change the world. But it continues in every child who learns, every innovator who creates, every person who decides to make tomorrow just a little better than today. And that's how legends never really end. They become movements. So, what is the real secret of success? It's not about becoming Bill Gates. It's about discovering the Bill Gates within you. That spark, that purpose, that courage to care. Because once you find that, you've already succeeded. Sometimes, when we talk about success, we imagine luxury, fame, power, and applause. But the real story of Bill Gates tells us something far greater. Because behind every line of code, behind every company he built, there was a deeper purpose, a desire to make life better for others. And that is where the true secret of success lives. Bill Gates began as a curious boy, not as a genius, not as a billionaire, just a kid with big dreams and endless questions. He didn't chase money, he chased possibility. He didn't seek fame, he sought impact. And when failure knocked, he didn't stop. He learned, because he believed one simple truth. Success isn't about being the smartest in the room. It's about being the most committed to your purpose. From Microsoft to the Gates Foundation, his journey wasn't about creating machines. It was about creating meaning. He turned his knowledge into compassion, his influence into service, his wealth into hope for millions of others. And in doing so, he rewrote the definition of greatness. The world will remember Bill Gates not just for the computers he built, but for the lives he touched, for the child who survived because of a vaccine, for the student who believed because of his words, for the dreamer who dared to start because he showed that one person, one idea, can change everything. That's the power of a purpose-driven life. And maybe that's what we should all remember. Success is not found in titles, degrees, or money. It's found in moments of courage, in choices made with empathy, in the quiet acts that no one sees but that change everything. The true secret of success is to care enough to learn, to care enough to fail and try again, to care enough to give back even when you've already won. So, as you finish listening to this story, ask yourself, what will your code be? What will you build, create, or change for the world? Because success doesn't belong to those who wait. It belongs to those who act with purpose. Bill Gates wrote his legacy in innovation, but the message he left for us is written in humanity. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest code ever written. True success isn't about becoming Bill Gates. It's about discovering the Bill Gates within you. Inspired by the life of Bill Gates.